This is the true story of when one podcast host finally watches a foundational program in their favorite television genre. I'm your host, Walker. This is the Recap Episode, a podcast where I explore and analyze reality television. In this episode, I'm covering MTV's The Real World, New York. The Real World. Many say that this is where reality TV, as we know it, at least for these documentary-style shows, these structured reality shows, really got its start. I initially didn't quite believe that this one show could have laid the groundwork for that entire subgenre of reality television, but now that I've watched it, and I'd never seen it before, I am fully in that camp. And I will get into this later, but this is such a good case study of how exactly this type of program is approached and made and delivered and received. What is The Real World? I'll actually just let the show's intro explain that to you.
This is the true story.
True story.
Of 7 strangers picked to live in a loft
and have their lives taped
to find out what happens.
What?
When people stop being polite. Could you get the phone?
and start getting real.
The real world.
A very simple premise. We see it all the time these days, but back in 1992, this is an entirely novel idea. Get complete strangers, force them to live together, put cameras on them 24/7, and see what you can make of it when you get all that footage out at the end. There are a lot of genre-defining techniques and conventions that The Real World uses for the very first time that then get copied and reused by future shows. And if you're an avid reality TV watcher, you'll definitely recognize the talking head confessional, the quick cut editing style to connect and produce a small story out of a large amount of footage and content. And it's these techniques, it's this style that leads many people to say that The Real World is the precursor to pretty much all reality television that we have today, all that came after it over the last 30-something years. Some camps will tell you that reality TV started before this. Cops was on air for the first time in 1989. That was a show that captured reality on camera. An American Family was made in 1973. That was a very similar format, where that show was made by basically just putting cameras for as much time as possible with an American family, see what they produce, and see what stories come out of it. It really just kind of depends on who you talk to about it, their awareness, and their preferences towards the genre. I've covered Cops recently, and I've covered An American Family before. That was the first episode of this podcast. And while those shows definitely have their place, I will say Real World is so much closer to everything we have today. Not only in how the audience watches the show and what it's like to consume this media, but also in how it's made, how it's edited, how it is produced, designed, conceived, every part. So let's get into this history of this show. MTV, back in the early 90s, was looking for something new for its network, and they were really wanting a scripted soap show. They wanted something that was inspired by shows like Beverly Hills and 90210. So they reached out and collected Mary Ellis Bunham and Jonathan Murray to come up with something for them. These two together founded Bunham Murray Productions, which is now claimed to have really spearheaded the reality show genre. Mary Ellis specifically was chosen because she had an established career in daytime dramas. She worked as an executive producer for Search for Tomorrow, As the World Turns, Santa Barbara, and Loving. So she really knew how to produce a good engaging and captivating story about the drama of people, their interactions, and their relationships, and how they move through their lives. And MTV really wanted to capitalize on that. While they were planning everything and trying to assemble and design the show, it was realized that a scripted show was just a little bit too expensive for MTV at the time, at least of the scale of a standard soap. Given the need for writers, actors, costume designers, makeup artists, and then all the crew that comes with such a scripted show, they just trashed the idea. But instead of getting rid of it completely and putting Mary Ellis and Jonathan away, they said, let's pivot this to an unscripted soap, a unscripted drama series, which is actually what it was tagged and listed as on Paramount Plus, where I watched it. And this idea was significantly cheaper, so, MTV and the production execs love that. And Ben and Mary decided, let's just cast a bunch of, quote, regular people, make them live in an apartment together, and tape their daily life. They believed that if they could get a diverse enough cast of 7 people, that would be enough of a basis for enough action, enough intrigue and drama that they could all interact without scripts and give them enough content in their footage time to produce an engaging and entertaining show. I could not find much information about how this first season was cast. All I found was in some book, either Jonathan or Mary Ellis had a quote where they said they ran around and they were putting up flyers on telephone poles, trying to get people to audition for the show or get interest. I really couldn't find any information. The cast members themselves, I couldn't find anything where they stated like how they came to hear about the show, except for 1 or 2 of them, or what the process was like for them. I have found articles about future seasons. People have gone to the audition / casting process for future seasons of The Real World, and they've written about how that went, but nothing about this first one. I did find out that they had 500 applicants. The 7 that were selected to be the cast of the show were paid $2,600 for their time on the show, which was filmed over 3 months. I did some comparisons. $2,600 in 1992 is $5,957.30 in 2025, at least at the time of recording this episode. Season 1 takes place in New York. They live in a loft in southern Manhattan, in Soho. $5,957 over the course of 3 months is not anywhere close to even live in a studio in New York. I can tell you that firsthand because I live in Brooklyn. So, I hope that the $2,600 at the time was enough for all of them for what they needed. So, the building that was used for the apartment for the show that all the housemates lived in is still standing. The inside has been renovated, so it is no longer the original loft that was used for the show. The residence is at 565 Broadway in Soho, corner of Prince Street. You can go there today. You can see the outside. There's a lot of establishing external shots of the building, so you kind of get a good sense of it. If you know what it looks like, and you go look at it, you can clearly go, oh, that's the Real World building. The building itself was a 9-story, 10-unit co-op when it was initially scouted for the show, and the production company from MTV converted it into a 4,000 square foot duplex that served as the residence, but also a behind-the-scenes filming location headquarters. Some other details about this renovation process I found was the second and third floors. A bunch of walls that originally separated 2 adjacent apartments on each floor were removed to create a single large loft space. And we see that. We see it's 2 floors, plenty of bedrooms, plenty of space. So it makes sense that they basically took, 4 total units and turned it into that. Production was there as well, in the same building with all of their monitors and equipment they needed for video, audio, behind the scenes. They were just tucked away into another little corner of the building. The show was filmed from February 16th to May 18th, 1992. So 3 months, I believe that's 13 weeks. And filming wrapped the 18th, and then the show premiered May 21st. Makes sense, the first episode is really just introductions, so they've had all 3 months to work on making that episode. Show aired weekly until August 13th, 1992, so a good summer season show. Some behind-the-scenes information here that I'll talk about. Murray got quoted about the production and filming process, because this is the first time something like this has been done. Documentaries had been done before, of course, right? And if you saw a camera on the street, you would probably assume a documentary or like a news broadcast, if there's not a giant film crew. Murray said they were calling it a docu-series anytime anyone asked, because they were filming out and about throughout New York. People on the street would ask, hey, what are we making? He said he instructed producers and the cast always just tell them it's a documentary or it's a student film, so they'll leave us alone. I think even at one point in one of the later episodes in the season, you can hear someone in the background even ask, what are you filming? But they didn't get paid any mind by any of the cast or anything. They're probably so used to it by that point. One thing that this show uses pretty heavily, and again, I've never actually watched any of The Real World. This is my first exposure, not only to this particular season, but to the show at large. So I don't have a good basis for what the show is like later or currently. But this show relies heavily on the talking head confessional interview. If you don't know what that is it's a moment where one of your cast members sits down, speaks directly into the camera to explain some event that happened, express their feelings and thoughts on something, talk about someone else. We call it a talking head just because it's shoulders up and that's all you're seeing. Sometimes they're called confessionals because it's where your cast members are getting things off their chest, they're venting, or sometimes it's just called the interview. Here they kind of refer to them more as interviews. I'm used to calling them talking heads. I'll probably just call them both names, or even confessionals still. But filming everything was not super easy. 92 didn't have quite the same level of technology as we have now. So when they needed to go film something somewhere, they had to make sure they had all the equipment and they had all the tools they needed to do that properly. There's one moment later on in the season that we'll get to where two of the cast members start an argument inside the house and then go outside. And I found in some behind-the-scenes talking, Murray stated that to actually capture that in time, they tossed one of their cameras out the window to a production member down on the street and then ran all the cords out the same window instead of doing the old process of getting battery packs and making sure everything's good to go. They kind of just had to hodgepodge it together to make sure they could capture that moment in time and not miss anything. However, because of the nature of this show, especially with 7 people, you're not going to capture everything at every moment. Even if you have, 40 cameras all around the house and 2 camera people on the cast members themselves as often as you can. So this show does rely on these confessional interviews quite a bit to fill in the gaps, particularly for certain events, or just to get the housemates' opinions and thoughts on each other. And we see this, and I find this very charming. In a lot of shows today, these confessional interviews, talking head moments, are filmed in a green screen room or in a very specific location. Maybe they have a blurred out or a constant background. Sometimes tricks are pulled to even disguise when these confessionals and interviews are filmed, because they may not actually be filmed. They're not going to be filmed in the moment of an argument, right? Even though when you watch the show, that's when they cut in to these confessionals frequently. They'll film them later that day, or maybe later in the week, or even after the whole, shooting for a season has wrapped. They'll sit down the cast members and say, okay, we're going to go over the whole season. We're going to cover everything. For this show, they didn't really have a dedicated place to do these interviews. So instead what they did was they kind of just did it wherever they could. So we get interviews up on the roof, we get them on the street, we get them in the elevator shaft, in the hallway. They film one of the cast members doing an interview in the bathtub. It's everywhere. I think at one point we're in a studio and they do a talking head in the studio. I find it charming. I like when so much of a show is so heavily produced that they do still have these kind of moments of realness. I will say, where not everything is so like picture perfect and constructed. They have a thing where it's like, you know what, this is the best we can do in the moment, and we're going to make the best of what we can. So they do. So, our 7 cast members for season 1, our 7 housemates are Becky. She's 24 from New Hope, Pennsylvania. She's a singer. Andre, 23 from Detroit, Michigan. He's described as like the prototypical Gen X, like the lazy, laid-back guy in some writings. And I think he was described that way on MTV's website, like on his bio. His thing is he is in a band. He's a guitar player and vocalist with a band that he's been performing with for 3 years. We have Heather B. Gardner. Heather B., she's 20, from Jersey City. She is a hip-hop artist with the group Boogie Down Productions at the start of filming. She tells us she's on the verge of like a big career break. Julie from Birmingham, Alabama. She's the youngest. She's 19. She's an aspiring dancer coming to New York to learn how to dance. She's our fish out of water. She is our audience entry point into the group and also kind of into New York. Everyone else in the cast has been in or to or around New York for a while beforehand. So Julie really is our kind of like, she's the one we connect to everyone else through. At least that's the way the show is set up. We have Norman. He's 25 from Wakefield, Michigan. He is a painter. He had a design like group firm thing that he started up right before the show started, named after his dog Gouda. He's the like lovable weirdo. That's how he's characterized. He's my favorite. Just saying. We have Eric, 20 from Ocean Township, New Jersey. He's a magazine and up-and-coming TV model at this point in the show. Boy next door type. Bad boy. A little bit of a womanizer character. That's how they play him off. He's like, you know, the characteristic hot one that everyone would swoon after back then. And today. I get it. And then Kevin, oldest, 26 from Jersey City. He is the one that's made out to be really educated. He's a poet. He's a writer. He's an activist. And that's our 7. So, as stated before, a diverse group of individuals, all of them who have some kind of career aspiration. All of them believed that being on a show like this would help them get some kind of exposure, and it definitely did. I mean, how many of them did I state were some kind of artist, right? But at the same time, you know, none of them really knew what they were getting into. Something like this never been done before, but they were all willing to be that first experiment and see what happens. So, let's break real quick, and then I will get into recapping the events of this first season. So this first season had 13 episodes. Each of them were about 22 minutes. They filled a 30-minute time slot in the show, or in the TV schedule. We get 1 or 2 primary stories to follow each episode that will focus on one or a collection of the housemates. Usually when it's a collection, it's focusing on the relationship those particular people have with each other. And if it's a single person by themselves, we're kind of just getting most of like their story and their experience, which is interesting to think about, or interesting to watch. When you think about the goal of the show, they wanted to stick 7 strangers together and see what would happen and film that. And then we spend a fair amount of the show with people by themselves, going off and doing their own thing. I did find out in some writing about the show and some discussion and interviews that the castmates and production have done later on, that even though they were all living in the loft, a lot of them actually didn't spend most of their time there. They were out doing other things, and for the 6 of them that were had been in the area before or were able to travel to where they were from, they just did. There's whole episodes where we just don't even see Kevin. I think there's a few where we don't see Eric much at all. Maybe they snipped in a interview with him as his appearance in that episode. But 2, maybe 3 main plots to follow in each episode. I'm going to recap quickly each episode, give you its title and the main plot of it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through and I'm actually going to explain the through storylines of each of the 7 castmates and talk a bit about how they're characterized and what their main events and stories were for the show. So episode 1 is titled This is the True Story, hearkening to the intro. It's the introductory. We get to meet all the housemates. We get to watch the housemates meet each other. We spend most of this episode following Julie from Alabama to New York. We don't really get the moving sequence for anyone else. The most we really see of them is them entering the loft for the first time in that regard. We really follow Julie. We get to hear about what her parents think about this. We get to see a made-up scene about her at church. And following her from the airport, her in the cab. So really, again, pushing that she's the fish out of the water. She's the one we're inserting into the story into. The other kind of side plot for this episode follows Becky and a little bit of Heather. Heather and Julie have an interesting moment where Julie makes a racist comment, and they spend some of the episode discussing it from everyone's perspective and showing Kevin and Heather, who are the only 2 black housemates, going out with Julie and kind of getting to know her, and talking to her. And we see Becky at the end of the episode. Throughout the episode, we get some snippets of her practicing and getting ready for a gig she has. Then at the end of the episode, she's performing in front of everyone. Episode 2 is called Julie and Eric, Could It Be Love? We obviously are focusing on Julie and Eric here. I will point out Eric was our main narrator for the last episode, even though we were following Julie for a lot of it. He was the one that was describing everyone as they came into the house and all their personalities and their temperaments and everything. So we do know Eric pretty well by the second episode. So in this episode, we see Eric at his modeling job. One of his shoots, we see him do a magazine shoot. He tells us about how he got into the modeling world. We see that Eric recently did a commercial for an underwear brand, or a perfume brand, in which he and a woman strip each other, because as he tells it, to advertise perfume you have to smell it, but you can't smell through a screen, so they have to do something to sell what the smell would be like. I understand what he's saying. But he does the commercial, and then he also goes on a local talk show to talk about the commercial and using your body for money in this way. They get the house to talk about it as well. That's kind of his thing for this episode. We also see Heather quite a bit in this episode into the studio. She takes Julie and Eric with her, so they could learn about her and her background. She's working on an album that she's getting ready to put together. The episode, of course, is called Julie and Eric, Could It Be Love? So there's quite a bit of footage here of moments of Julie and Eric interacting in what could be flirting. It could just be how they interact. Some people see it as flirting. I kind of saw it more of as a brother-sister kind of thing. But, the show will produce it however it wants to, and I will get into that later. Episode 3 is called Leather Chaps and Sequins. What is Eric getting himself into? We focus on Eric, obviously, and we get a little bit of Julie, a little bit of Andre, and a little bit of Norman in this episode. In this episode, we get a little bit of footage of Julie going around the city, getting lost. They love to just make her get directions on her own for fun, entertaining footage. Trying to get to the Broadway Dance Center, that's where she's taking dance classes. We spend more time with Eric, who's doing a shoot for a fitness magazine that's going in more of like a Playboy direction. They have a female model with him. They kind of just like, it starts really professional, and they keep it like modelly, but it gets like real intimate. And so Eric decides, he's like, wow, this is really cool. This is a really like strong first impression with this woman I've never met before. So then he spends the rest of the episode swooning after her. The reason it's called Leather Chaps and Sequins, What Is Eric Getting Himself Into, is because this model has more of like a rocker vibe. That's what she prefers for her aesthetic. So she tries to get Eric to adopt that, and he's like, nah, that's not me. We learn a little bit more about Norman. This is where we learned that he says he's bisexual. Everything else in the media that I've seen about the show says he's actually gay. It could be one of those things where the show decided to try to characterize him as bisexual instead of just gay, but who knows. Queer icon, either way. We learn that about Norman. We learn he's a painter and a designer. And then we see a little bit about Andre's band. Becky, Julie, and Norman go to see Andre's band perform. Episode 4, Trouble Throughout the House. This episode is entirely just like arguments and heated discussions among the housemates. We get a recap of some of the like minor past arguments, some background on Becky and like one of her situationships, and like a party they went to where Heather is not a fan of Becky's behavior at the party. That's a minor conflict, that's not that bad. Then we get to like the real central problem, which is Heather's not vibing with Eric, Eric's not vibing with Kevin, people are kind of mad at each other, and this is when we really find out as an audience, unless you've kind of been like paying attention, we've seen interview pieces from Kevin, and we obviously met him in the first episode. But this is when everyone kind of expresses, like, Kevin's just not here. He's just never around. But he, like, demands adherence to his schedule when he is around. He's pulling all these different things. We get a full-on, like, argument blown up between Kevin and Eric. Eric's sister, Kim, had been visiting the loft in the recent time when this happened. And Eric and Kevin are roommates in the loft. There's only, like, 3 bedrooms. How do you manufacture conflict and interaction when you put people in the same house? You make it so there's less bedrooms than there are people, and they have to sleep in the same room together, live in the same rooms. Eric and Kevin are roommates. Kim, Eric's sister, was staying in their room as well sometimes, especially since like Kevin wasn't there. Makes it easy. But then this turned into a big thing because Eric doesn't like how Kevin was treating Kim. I have a note here that this is like the longest we ever spend in one scene so far. This like argument scene around the table with all of them. Good way to like frame it and set up the episode and everything. It ends with people dispersing. Kevin, he like writes a letter to Eric with the intention for it to be private, but Julie and Heather find it and then like pass it around to the whole house. And the letter has Kevin's thoughts about the comparisons between himself and Eric. Largely focusing on like societal differences. Kevin is working with like a really good understanding of critical race theory and systemic issues, but not quite with the capacity of how to like talk to white people about that. And it comes out here with him trying to explain the way that he's being treated. He thinks has something to do with race, and that's important to talk about. But of course Eric's like, okay, but like, can you not be an asshole? We end that episode with Eric being like stating that he legitimately hates Kevin, and Kevin telling us that he's annoyed because Eric is just telling everyone else how he feels rather than actually confronting Kevin directly. We see a lot of like passive aggressive, like them in the same room just like looking at each other. The next episode is called Kevin and Eric Mend Their Relationship. I wonder what happens. We spend most of this with just watching Eric and Kevin hash things out. It starts tense, but then we see them go outside at one point so they can talk like away from their friends, but the cameras are still there, of course. It's hard to like tell in their conversation if anyone actually like gains any ground on any argument or anything, or if they kind of just talk so much and they're both just kind of like, you know what, let's just be done with it, and they move on. We do get some more of Eric's backstory here. We learned that he got in trouble with having steroids. He like dropped out of high school. He's been on probation for a year and a half. He's trying to do some like community service. Part of that, we learn about one of his longtime friends, Missy. This is like the girl that got away that he's been chasing after. And and we ended the game with Eric and Kevin at a Knicks game. We learned that Eric's father is actually like a ref for basketball. Eric talks about, oh, I wish I could see my dad more. Kevin cuts in. He's like, that's cool. I don't ever get to see my dad because he disowned me. Episode 6 is called Kevin, ... come back. We get Julie and Kevin at the start, which is not a pairing that we've like seen that often up to this episode. They're reading through these like books called like Sex and Love that production 100% planted to try to get these castmates to like talk about sex and then see if it would lead into the castmates like hooking up and whatnot. That never happened. Good try, production. We get some... I'm rereading my notes now and I'm remembering this, and this is like kind of is like funny, but at the same time, like, what is happening? Julie goes on a date and we go with her. Julie's 19. She's the youngest. There's a big thing about her being a virgin all throughout the series as well. She like rides off with a random biker at the end of episode 1, and someone else makes a comment about like, oh, she has her birth control. She's the little fish, big pond. She's getting herself into situations because she's still learning life skills and street smarts and whatnot. So she goes on a date with this guy, and I'm watching, and I'm like, this guy, he's interesting. The housemates have opinions of him. And I'm like, how old is this dude? He seems older. And then as I'm typing out this note for my document to like mention later, we find out that he's like 31 or something. And I'm like, oh, great, cool. It's good to know that I have like sense for this kind of thing. He drops the line on their date, you have a tremendous capacity for someone who is 19 years old. And I just type in all caps, girl, run. Get out of there. Luckily the date goes horribly, as Julie admits. So that was fun to see. We get some time with Kevin, spending some time with his girlfriend and his family life. We get to see some of him at home with his mom. Kind of just like tense footage of them standing in the kitchen. I don't really know what the point of that was, except for to characterize Kevin and his family and his background in a very specific way. Uncomfortable. The rest of this episode, and the reason why it's called like Kevin Come Back, is the group decides to play a prank on Kevin. It's a really good moment of getting to see like 6 of them are really bonding and spending time with each other. And then there's Kevin, who's never around. They play a prank where they all like switch personalities. Except for Heather and Becky, maybe. We don't get any footage of them acting. But this like freaks out Kevin so much because Julie's fake personality is to be like a slut. And he's legitimately like thinking that's like, oh, New York and the stress has finally gotten to Julie. She's becoming an entirely different person. She's abandoning her morals and her character and her background. And he legitimately like leaves because he's so freaked out. We ended the episode that way. Next episode is called Heather Wants to Grab His Booty. I'll let you guess what's going to happen. Put you on the edge of your seat. We recap the prank. Kevin does come back. They explain everything, and he's just like, okay. We get a lot of stuff about the girls just chatting about men, as you do. Heather is obsessed with Larry Johnson. She wants to go grab his booty. And that is the rest of our episode. Is Heather and Julie going to a game so they can go see Larry. We do find out that Heather, Becky, and Julie are actually going to go to Jamaica for a bit in this episode. They get the like information about it, so we get some fun moments of Heather and Julie. They can't think of anyone they know to call that they can reach to tell they're going to Jamaica, so they just like cold call people from the phone book to tell them they're going to Jamaica. Julie was really good at this. I'll point out that was fun. I also have a note here that Heather and Julie have like a really good friendship at this point in the show. You can tell that like Heather took the time out to really try to get to know Julie and spend time with her and kind of lay the groundwork for a good relationship here and a good friendship. So they go to the game. Heather gets to meet Larry Johnson. Julie plays the wingman. She does it excellently. Very funny moment at the end. They missed the last bus home to New York, so they kind of just like standing outside the venue, the arena, like, how are we going to get home? And then it just like fades to black. So, that's good. During this episode as well, while Heather and Julie are having fun at the game, we are cut back and forth between that and an argument that's going on at home between Becky and Kevin, where they start talking about politics. They move into civil rights. Becky is trying to talk about like the potential for opportunity in America and for young people to change the country. And Kevin's trying to explain to her about like opportunity is not the same for everyone in America, especially on the basis of race. Spirals into a whole argument. So that's a great thing. Becky and Kevin are now, against each other in terms of what we've learned from the show. Episode 8, Becky falls into troubled love. This is the Jamaica episode. Becky, Heather, and Julie all go to Jamaica. We basically spend the whole episode with them there. It's cut very funnily to me, contrasted with scenes back in New York of like cold, rainy, bad weather. And Andre like going crazy. We get a little bit of Kevin and Andre interacting here, which is really nice. We hadn't really like seen a lot about that yet. Kevin writes a poem and Andre turns it into like a song and stuff like that, which is cute to see that. I have a note that there's a really strange talking head during this episode from Andre. Again, I told you they film them like wherever they can get them. There's one with Andre where he's laying on the loft's pool table and like looking upward, and his talking head is being filmed above him. Like, I guess the camera person is like standing on a staircase or something. I'm like, why? Okay. Of all the ways to like set that up, I thought that was very interesting and kind of strange. The whole point of the ladies going to Jamaica is so they can like find men to hang out with. Kevin has a girlfriend. We get into this episode that Norman starts dating a guy, Charles. Eric has Missy and Karen. So everyone's like, let's get some men for the ladies. They go to Jamaica. They should do that. They're not successful. There are some fun bits and some fun moments of like Julie going over to some guys and like pretend flirting with them. She's very good at it. And she thought this one guy she was talking to was like doing it back at her, but he was actually like sincere. And he just ended up talking to her about like laying tile for a good chunk of time. They're leaving Jamaica and are like, well, that was a lot of nothing. And then we get one little snippet before we like fade to black near the end of the episode, where it's either Julie or Becky. One of them says like, well, something did happen in Jamaica, which is like a good way to do it. We get an on-screen chyron for Becky laying with a man in Jamaica, and we see Bill, ex-real-world director. So it turns out one of the directors really liked Becky and got a little too close, so he got kicked off working on the show. And we actually see him in a couple episodes going forward. I guess they let him hang out because he was kind of with Becky. I do have some stuff here since I mentioned it. I'll cut this in right now. Jonathan Murray spoke about this incident at one point, and I got this from an article. While Boonham and Murray explained to their production staff what their roles and did not entail, this was a moment where like lines were crossed. Becky began to have this inappropriate relationship with the production director, Bill, during the trip to Jamaica. Murray is quoted as saying, from the beginning, we'd explained to our crew that this is the story of the relationship between the cast members. It's not about their relationship to us. So there's a line here, and you should not cross the line. He said, we're not going to become their best friends. When something happens in the loft, if there's an argument, we don't want the cast members coming to production to express heartache or upset. We want them talking to each other. So production needs to stay on their side of the line, and Murray said that we took that really seriously. So then when one of the directors crossed that line, they had to be like, hey, bud, you can't continue to work on the production. So he went to the other side, and he was now part of the like extended crew, which we find out that he like does not like. He doesn't like being on the camera side and being recorded constantly. Last part of this 8th episode, we spent most of the time focusing on Jamaica. At one point we find out Becky and Kevin hash everything out, once they get back. So everyone's on mostly good terms again. Yay. Episode 9 is called Julie in a Homeless Shelter. It's a Julie episode, as many of them are. It's a little bit of a Norman episode. We get Heather's opinion about Norman and his dating life, dating Charles. And we get some, like, Norman talking about it well. He's very excited. He's very happy. By the end of the episode, it's also Norman's birthday in this episode. By the end of the episode, we find out that they're no longer a thing because they just want different things at that moment. So the main two, like, events in this episode is Julie during a walk in one of the parks, I think Central Park, with Andre and Norman's dog Gouda, comes across a, like, homeless encampment, like a tent city but cardboard. And Julie meets a homeless woman named Darlene and really gets to know her. We get a talking head from Kevin about this where he's like, oh, Julie, that's really cool. She's really sincere about helping people, and it's important that she did that, but may not be, the most significant thing she could have done. But it's still important. Julie learns a lot about, like, Darlene's life and her experience being homeless, especially in New York City. She comes back later to, like, spend a night in the encampment with Darlene, which she does, and we get footage of, and we, she and the audience learn a bit about homelessness and that experience being on, like, the fringe and the outcast in society in 92, which is not different from how it is today. The other big event of this episode is the group. A couple of them go. First, they go to a rally for Jerry Brown, who was running for candidacy in the 92 presidential election. We then find out that Jerry Brown loses the primary. I think at least in New York. Obviously he loses the whole primary. Clinton won that election. And the group also goes to a pro-choice rally in D.C. So we get some talking heads about abortion. Lots of different, like, cuts here. It's hard to recap everything that happens because we get so many, like, cuts to each of the people. We have the group going to the pro-choice rally, and so we have stuff, like, in their car, and we have talking heads from them about their opinions on abortion and going to a political rally and being in D.C. And then we're cut somewhat randomly back to, like, Kevin teaching a class at Tisch where he's talking to the students about, like, the right to choose, and Heather and Julie had, like, come along to watch him teach. And you're kind of like, and then we cut back to the rally, and you're like, whoa, okay. I mean, it was relevant, but it breaks things up in a weird way that makes it fast-paced, yes, and, like, keeps your attention engaging, but hard sometimes to follow the one consistent story they're trying to get you to follow. They go to the rally, we get some of Norman's backstory, and Julie tries to go to Darlene's church to see her sing for Easter, but Darlene's not there, and Julie finds out after she goes looking for her back at the encampment that, and Becky tells us this, not Julie, Becky tells us this, someone had told Darlene a way that she could find crack, so she went up and got that, and, left the encampment, and all of her stuff is gone. So episode 10 is called He's So Ugly, He's Cute. Main whole plot in this episode that relates to the title is the crew finds this ugly little dog, little goblin gremlin creature, and they take it in and they spend the whole episode trying to find its owner. Of course, they find the owner at the very end. We get some funny things here because Andre doesn't really like animals, and there's both a dog and a cat living in the loft, but he likes this dog because of how, like, ugly it is. The other plot in this episode is that Julie's mom and her brother are visiting New York. Julie's very apprehensive and anxious and a little stressed about this because her relationship with her mother is not exactly the strongest. But a bunch of the cast support her through this. We get to see Heather goes out to dinner with her and her mom and her brother. Norman goes out with them. So, it's nice to see the support from the group. This is contrasted with information we hear about Andre and his family. Andre's in a band. We get to see them perform again. We get backstory of him. We find out his mom is also a musician. And we find out that in contrast to Julie and her mom's relationship, the relationship between Andre and his mom is much stronger, much different, much more close. So, nice contrast. I have a note here that I don't think we saw Kevin at all in this episode. Episode 11, Julie thinks Kevin is a psycho. I'll let you sit with that title for a moment. We get a recap of Kevin moments, and then we immediately start with Julie telling everyone else about a confrontation she had with Kevin, where she claims that he spat at her and lifted like a candlestick or some object in like an emotion that she thought he was going to hit her with it or throw it at her. Of course, this is a situation, we have two stories. We never actually get to find out what the true story is. The cast members, the housemates, are trying to figure out what the truth is, and we never really actually get to figure that out. It's kind of left up to ambiguity by the end. Kevin and Julie have a big fight about their relationship, where they are in their lives, how people perceive them, race in America again. This is the one I mentioned earlier where the fight started inside and then went outside, so the camera crew had to like scramble to catch up with them to make sure they caught it in time. We get some more with Kevin and some of the other housemates trying to like understand each other and perspectives and everything. By the end of the episode, it seems like Kevin and Julie have made things up. It's not a perfect relationship anymore. Julie makes a statement where she's like, I think Kevin is really smart and really cool and really awesome. He's a good friend. I don't ever want to be alone with him again, is what she says. So, who knows? We end the episode with a big party at the loft. I don't remember why we're having a big party. I don't think I ever figured out. But it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger where Heather is being accused of assaulting some other woman guest at the party. Episode 12 is called WWF is in the House. We continue with that cliffhanger from the previous. Heather's taken in by police and questioned. Both of them decide not to press charges, however, whatever. The main plot for this episode is Bill, the ex-director that was involved with Becky, works with Andre's band so they can make a music video. And we get a lot of fun footage of them running around and making this video. Andre tells us the bandmates that he's been with for about 3 years. He's known them since 3rd grade. And then the other piece of this episode is Eric and Heather's relationship. It feels like it's been a while since I've talked about Eric. He's been in the other episodes. Like in the past episode, he came to bat for Julie. He was like adamantly on team Julie because he didn't like Kevin already. But this is actually like an Eric episode. Eric and Heather have conflicting ideas of like the right personality to have and the right way to like approach life. Eric says Heather has the most problems. Heather says Eric is the cause of the most problems. That kind of thing. I have a note here. I noticed it in this episode, and maybe they did it previously, but Julie's talking head interviews in this episode are all like so zoomed in that her face fills the entire screen. They definitely didn't start that way. Earlier talking heads with Julie had her whole like bust upwards. Like, I don't know why she was so close to the camera in this episode. Eric and Heather, they're fighting a conflict. We get a cut to like 1 week later. They're best of friends again. So, apparently they had a talk and now they get along. And this is pretty close to like the end. The argument, we do have a timestamp for the argument between Kevin and Julie in episode 11. It's like a week and a half before the end of filming. So, episode 13 is called Goodbye to the Big Apple. We're told this is the last 4 days of filming, and we kind of get a chronological thing going through. Everyone gives talking heads about what they learn, and each cast member talking about each other. Andre mentions that the show was like really good exposure, and we get to see him performing. We get to kind of see everyone else doing their thing. Julie talks about how, it was a cool experience, but maybe she met more personal goals than career goals by being on the show. She grew a lot over the 3 months, but where's her dancing at, Julie also says, it's a life experience packed into 3 months. You're learning things you didn't want to learn and hear things you didn't want to hear, but you go through it and you grow. And the final thing that we see of this first season is Eric leads a charge into the control room of the production that's in the same building as the loft. He gets the 7 housemates. They all break in, essentially, and they flip the script on the production crew. So the 7 castmates are now the ones with all the equipment and everything, and they make the crew members be the ones who are like filmed, and some of the crew members sit down and like imitate the cast members and recreate some of the moments from the series. Now that I've kind of recapped the whole flow of the episodes, let me just go over kind of each character's main story, because I think it makes more sense to talk about it in that way. So, I'll start with Julie. Julie, again, she's our fish out of water, as I mentioned 300 times already. It's her first time in New York. It's her first time in this kind of environment. She's learning a lot. She's having to grow a lot throughout this series. She's kind of the one that everyone wants to protect as well. In the argument with Kevin in episode 11, like, everyone kind of immediately jumps onto her side immediately, and Kevin is trying to have to fight this uphill battle to get people to even, like, consider his side. But everyone also, at the same time, like, really wants to take her under her wing and make sure she's not, getting herself into trouble. We get a lot of footage early on of the other members kind of showing her how to do New York. So, and she does grow a lot. The big plot with her, again, is they focus on she's a virgin, so they're constantly trying to, like, ooh, is she going to do something, like, scandalous? That's something a virgin wouldn't do. Especially, like, one from Alabama with the Southern values and everything. And they kind of get into the, supposed alleged romance between her and Eric. Speaking of Eric, his through line is kind of being... He's the bad boy, he's the cocky one, he's a model, but he has, like, this complex backstory. He has this rather complex relationship with lots of women, and it's kind of most we get of him is him trying to figure out how to, like, interact with the other people well and kind of be an adult properly in these various situations. Heather had problems with him. Kevin had problems with him. I think Becky had problems with him at one point. I'll go into Becky since I just mentioned her. Her kind of plot is she's a musician, but we don't really get a lot of that. We get it in, like, the first episode, and we get it near the end. Her storyline really rests on the incident in Jamaica, and then she's a good narrator, she's a good commentator. She does provide a lot of good talking head commentary and insight on the events and the relationships that happen in the house. She's good at recapping, so they often use her for that. All in all, she doesn't really have a lot of stuff throughout this. She has the moment where she has the argument with Kevin about race. Kevin calls her racist, and she does the whole, like, how am I racist kind of thing. And she has these situations where, does she want a man? What kind of relationship does she want? But there's not as much about Becky as there are other characters. Heather, we start in with Heather that she's a rapper, she's a hip-hop artist, she's already, like, working on this career, and we get to see some of that in a couple of episodes of her in the studio and producing her music and working with her production team on that. And a lot of her stuff is just, she has a big personality that can lead to fun, entertaining moments, or it can lead to conflict, and that's the entire thing with Heather, is which of those are we going to get this time? With Norman, I almost feel like we didn't really, like, learn a lot about Norman until, a couple episodes in. He provides, talking head commentary in the first episode and the second episode. And in episode 3, we do get to see, that's when we learn about his sexuality. We get to go to, like, an art show with him because he's a painter. So we do learn a bit about him then, but that's episode 3, and then, like, the next big thing about Norman, when we get, like, his backstory, he tells us about, like, being gay bashed and his experience with sexuality and coming to terms with that, and how he likes his perspectives on, like, dating and romance. We don't get that until episode 8. So, Norman's just kind of there. I will say he's the one in the house that, like, no one really has problems with. He's kind of, again, I call him the lovable weirdo. He's my favorite character. My favorite cast member. He's always the one that, like, has a story or could, like, break up a moment or has some fun quip to provide. Andre is in a band. Andre is also, to me, kind of like Norman. He's just kind of there. We get really well to know, like, his character. He's really laid back. He's very chill. He's proud about the band. He wants to do well. He's excited that they're getting more gigs, or he's excited about the exposure that he can get. he has some, like, really mature moments when we get these sort of one-on-one interactions between Andre and other housemates that really do show that, like, his knowledge of the world and relationships, which is nice, but I don't think we really get a lot of, like, growth or change for Andre throughout the season. Like, the biggest thing for him is they go on a radio show at one point, which is really cool. The housemates go to his gigs, and with Bill, his band gets to make a music video that we then see. So, other than that, there's not a ton of Andre content. Kevin is difficult to talk about because the way that the show has characterized him is not doing him any favors. The big 3 Kevin events that we get are an argument and a fight with Eric, an argument and a fight with Becky, an argument and a fight with Julie. During the episode 11 with the fight with Julie, we do get to see, and we've seen cuts of him delivering his poetry at a club during, like, a poetry slam competition thing, and we've seen the stuff with his girlfriend, and we see a little bit of, like, him with his mom, and we do get to know about his backstory, and we get to know about him wanting to, mentor young black men to make sure they don't end up in bad situations, and they have, like, a strong guiding figure in their lives. But that's not what the show focuses on. The show instead chooses to focus on, at least for the relationships with the cast members, these 3 instances of him fighting them, and him arguing, and then having to, like, make up with them. It's very, I don't want to say on the nose, but what Kevin is talking about in all of these arguments and throughout the show is that black people in America have an entirely different experience than white people in America, one that is set up against them from the start because of America's racist history. And then the show does exactly what he's talking about and doesn't do him any favors. The show, you just watch it and you kind of step away and you're like, let me describe Kevin, and it's like, oh, he's aggressive. Like, that's exactly what he's talking about, is, like, bad. He mentions it multiple times. He's like, because I'm a black man, I'm seen automatically as, like, the aggressor in situations, especially when the people he's arguing with are white women. Right? So, it's hard to talk about Kevin. And his, like, through line, because it's almost like they wanted to prevent him from having a good story. There could have been something there with when the house confronted him about how he was absent so often and so frequently. But then that doesn't really, if he, like, made a change after that to be more present, it's not really, like, highlighted or shown. So I don't think the show really did anything good for Kevin. It's hard to tell if the show really did anything good for any of them, honestly, in terms of, like, artistic and career exposure. I agree with Julie. I'm sure they all, like, grew from the experience of participating in making the show and living with each other and learning about each other and growing together. But in terms of what the final product show does for each of these 7 people, not a ton. It kind of just, like, turned them into TV characters. After the show wrapped up, all 7 of them, went on to live their lives. From information that I was able to find, Andre still performs and works on music as a solo act. The band during the show was called Rain Dance. I found that he moved to LA after the show and released 3 albums with a band called River Rogue. And he was on Icon vs. Icon at one point. Becky went on to release some music. None of it really had any staying power. She still does kind of, like, folk style music, singer-songwriter stuff. Eric had the longest and biggest career out of anyone in television after this. He hosted and competed on several shows for MTV, lots of real-world spin-off projects, and kind of review recap programs. He was on Road Rules / The Challenge, which was like a direct spin-off from The Real World. He was on Dance Fever, Celebrity Paranormal Project. He hosted The Grind. I think he hosted Confessions of a Teen Idol. Now he works as a health and wellness coach. Just neat. Heather, with her hip-hop rap career, released a lot of singles. Did some minor movie roles, signed with MCA Records in 98. She now does like radio show DJ stuff. Does some of that with Sirius XM. Has her own show called The Happy Hour with Heather B. Julie really went back into the private sphere. I could find that she did some more dance stuff. Now she works as a dance teacher. She's a mom to 2. It's her big thing. Norman, he went on to make some art for Disney and Nickelodeon at some point. His clothing and furnishings design firm, Gouda, they did some more things. Got some designs to be sold in Sharper Image and Bloomingdale's. Norman participated in 2 seasons of Road Rules / The Challenge. Kevin really was the one who had the most prolific career, I will say, after the show. But again, not really specifically because of the show. Right around the time of the show being filmed, he was tapped to join Vibe magazine. And he worked as part of that editorial team from 92 to 96. We actually see like one of the meetings he does with Vibe as part of the filming during the 11th episode, where we get the fight between him and Julie and the cuts of some more of his story. He worked for MTV again later. He was cast as the host of Straight from the Hood, an MTV special news report that aired in 93, which profiled the state of affairs for young people in South Central Los Angeles following the Rodney King verdict and the protests that followed. He conducted many interviews and published prolific writings about Tupac Shakur, and was recently, I believe, working on some kind of documentary series about Tupac. He tried to run for office. He was a Democratic candidate for the House of Representatives in Brooklyn in 2008 and 2010. Did not do well in either elections, so he decided to no longer run for any elected positions in 2012. I found some things that were saying that like his opposition during the election was trying to dig up stuff and expose him for like past violence against women, even though he was like outwardly transparent about it, and he's like, yes, I did some bad things, I have atoned for it, I am like correcting for that now. And he believes that, if you're going to run for public office, you should be willing to be transparent about everything. Nothing said that that's what contributed to him losing those elections, but obviously you could see the image, the connotations of a black man and then talking about violence against women probably didn't help those elections. And all I'm going to say, my 2 cents here, is people wouldn't vote for him because of that, but they'll vote for Cuomo. Anyway, Kevin Powell was also the curator for the first exhibit on the history of hip-hop in America at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. 2014, he was named the International Ambassador for the Dylan Thomas Centennial in America after going to the United Kingdom to do a series of lectures and workshops on said 20th century poet. Cornell University owns the Kevin Powell Archive, which documents Kevin's work to date in print, photos, videos, books, handwritten notes, speeches, and select memorabilia, beginning with his appearance in The Real World and going forward. He's done a lot of writing, has numerous publications, he's been an activist. He's really had the biggest kind of career post-show of anyone that was on this first season. As for the building, in case you're curious, after the show it was converted back into a private residence. I mentioned this near the top. You can go see the property from the outside in Soho. It's private residence, so you can't tour it. They don't have the loft there anymore. But you can go look at it outside. I think it currently has scaffolding up, just like every other building here in New York. This is a fun show. I recommend watching it. Highly recommend watching it. It's on Paramount Plus. That's where I saw it. You can get a free trial, and it's only 13 episodes of 20-ish minutes each. So you could definitely... I watched it over the course of like 3 days. 3 or 4 episodes a day. So, not that bad. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It's... If you've watched a lot of reality TV that's come out since then, you can definitely watch it and go like, okay, I see why people are saying this is where everything came from. And if you are really familiar with reality TV across the past decades and currently, then you may be asking, what was production doing this whole time? Because you may be fully aware of how production meddles in creating specific storylines and plots and characterizations, how editing is used to achieve a specific perspective or viewpoint, or paint a cast member as a particular personality or a character. This is how we get the villain edit or the fan favorite, which may be entirely produced narratives that if you had access to the entire story and the entire experience, you as a viewer and audience member may not perceive those people in the same way. When they set out to make this show, again, recall that they really wanted a scripted soap. They wanted something with like high drama, interactions between people, dramatic relationships. And then they just went to the unscripted version because it was cheaper, but they still wanted to see if they could make this huge entertainment piece out of it. So, production here had quite a heavy hand in setting that up. In the first episode, we spent a lot of time with Julie. That was done on purpose, and you can tell why. She's our audience entry point into the world of the show, and for those that have never been there, into New York. We get to experience all the new things at the same time and in the same way she does, just through her, instead of actually physically doing them ourselves. But there's a scene at the beginning where, after we learn about Julie's sort of, southern life backstory, and we get kind of like the conservatism of her father and how she wants to, rebel against that a bit. We see her at church, and we see this church service with this rather like progressive pastor. That wasn't even her church. They had some footage of Julie at a church, or maybe they took her there. But this guy was giving like a cool speech that made sense with, or sermon that made sense with Julie's story, so they stitched that together. When Julie landed in New York, production actually had the cab driver that she got, which we got to see a brief, recorded clip of her talking to him about living and working in New York. They told this cab driver to drive her through Harlem and through the Bronx to like get to Soho, which was not at all like the direct route. Made no geographic sense to go that way. But they wanted to do that to kind of like show her that part of the city and get her reactions. And all of this was timed even so that she was the last person to enter the loft. Everyone got to like meet each other first, and then Julie showed up. With Julie, again, the relationship between her and Eric was very constructed. They did some interviews later on, and I also forgot to mention, all 7 castmates came back and did the Real World New York homecoming, like a reunion thing where they all moved in together again. They didn't all stay through the whole thing. Like, I think Becky left 3 episodes in. But all 7 of them came back, and they had mentioned at some point during like interviews and prep for that, or post-show press, that like there was never really a relationship between Julie and Eric. They never really saw each other that way. But there's a whole episode entitled like Julie and Eric, Could It Be Love? And the show really, really tried to like put them together. And there's a book about the history of reality TV called Cue the Sun that talks about this as well and mentions that one of the editors for the production crew was basically his project, his goal was to find the romantic story between Julie and Eric. So even though it didn't exist, what he did was he was scouring this footage, paying close attention to anything that he could quite, twist a little bit, edit it in just the right way to make it look like there was this romance brewing between the two. And that's where we get all these scenes that look like flirting, but when you kind of really look at them, again, to me it's like sibling behavior. Two people who are close in age that are put together, they both realize they're not really going to have any feelings for each other, but they're so comfortable with each other that again turns into a brother-sister relationship. But apparently when this editor found the shots that he wanted to construct this story, he was so excited that he literally danced for joy. So there was quite a bit of meddling that tried to happen and was luckily stopped by production. Production, wanted this dramatic, let's put all these people in, oh, they're going to have hookups, they're going to have crazy relationships. One, this never happened because most people except for Julie spent their time away from the apartment and not even living there. Apparently Heather was there the least, which is interesting because we're told Kevin was there the least, and that's a whole plot point for his story throughout the episodes is, where's Kevin? Why isn't he here? He doesn't really know the group because he's not hanging out with them. But at one point, drama, no one was flirting, there was no drama happening, no one was hooking up. And in the control room, the producers were literally trying to figure out what could they do to stir up things. Could they plant something in the house to cause a confrontation? And this is the comment I made earlier about there's lots of scenes with the cast members reading these books about love and sex and relationships that were 100% just put in the loft to try to get these people to hook up with each other and to have these conversations. The biggest event that happened was in one episode, a book of nude photography by Bruce Weber was supposed to be found in Eric and Kevin's room. This got staged, and it did happen, and it ended up putting Eric in so much distress that him and the other castmates, once they figured out what happened, refused to participate anymore. Because all of them, not just for kind of the immorality of doing this, but all of them were no, you're not actually paying attention, or you're not actually following the spirit of what you said you wanted to do. You said you wanted to just put us in the house and see what happens, and now you're sitting here trying to manufacture conflict and problems and issues and drama. And the whole crew was that's not what we signed up for. The entire stunt was manufactured, led to a huge conflict. The production team wanted them to just no, just you're gonna keep doing it, you're gonna keep going. One of the head production assistants that would do a lot of the interviews with the cast and was responsible for kind of talking, being the liaison between them and the major part of the crew, ended up siding with the cast. And she almost got the hammer brought down on her. But eventually this entire incident literally went all the way up to the execs at MTV, and an executive, Lauren Correll, actually sided with the cast and legitimately just stepped in and she's no more. You're not doing any more production interference. Just let the show happen and go on. And so this is where I said initially I was kind of well, I don't know if this is the show that really founded reality TV. But after reading about all this production meddling, I'm going to say, yeah, this is the show that founded reality TV the way we know it now. If you watch a structured reality show or a docuseries now, something like Big Brother, Drag Race, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, the Housewives series, Survivor even to an extent. The competition shows do it a little bit differently. But these ones where you're kind of just watching people do their thing, or you're watching people who've been collected and placed into a new situation, a new context, you know that like production has their hands all over creating and establishing and producing these storylines about the story they want to tell. It is nice to just put cameras on people and record it and see what that gives you, but then at the end of the day, you have to go through all that footage and figure out, well, what's actually going to be entertaining? How can I use all this to make an engaging TV show that is going to be watched, it's going to get good ratings, and it's going to want to get the network to order another season so I can stay in this job. So, you know, I get it, but it's interesting that even from this, like, very first, like, everyone has said, this is, like, the first time they're doing it. It's a brand new thing. And we have all these conventions, not only for the style, but for how the show is made. They all started here as well. There was no, like, let's stick to the raw experience of just recording people and seeing what we can make from it. It was, let's record people and see which storylines we can produce by collaging it all together. But yeah, definitely watch it. If you have watched The Real World, what do you think? Do you agree that the show didn't really do much for its cast members, except for turn them into television characters for the screen, for the audience's viewing pleasure? Do you like The Real World? Do you like this season or this series in general? I would say I enjoyed it. I'm excited to watch future seasons of The Real World, and to see what happens with this Road Rules / The Challenge. From what I know about this show, it's like an Amazing Race-esque competition show, but with people who were on The Real World. I've seen a couple episodes of Amazing Race, but I've never seen Road Rules / The Challenge. So I'm excited to see how the show evolves. I've seen from my research and seen into people talking about future seasons that it kind of transforms even further as it goes on into what we have today, where a lot more of like production meddling is like hidden in ways that you can't quite as easily pick it up. So like, for example, future seasons have all housemates are required to like actually sleep in the house or stick around, and they have to like go do things together. So they kind of like force these interactions, where, you know, some of that stuff you can look at it, you can kind of be like, well, okay, was that production, or is that like something the group wanted to go do? Or is this a group that is actually just willing to be in the house more often? You know, it's hard to tell. That was The Real World, Season 1. On Instagram, you can follow for updates and interact with me at the recap episode. On YouTube, it's the recap episode pod. All the episodes get uploaded there, and in the future, any special side content will appear on YouTube as well. Maybe down the line, I'll do like a ranking of all of the housemates in Real World across all the seasons. That would be like on the YouTube channel. Until next time, this has been the true story of these 7 randos and 1 podcast host. Thank you for listening.